Well, and look at what happened in Iowa. And don't think this was some accident or some mistake of technology, because it doesn't appear that it was. The reason that what happened in Iowa occurred is that Bernie Sanders won Iowa. So that's why they didn't want to report on it, because the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, the club of people who decide the elections, remember, just like they said, just like they took the election away from Bernie Sanders last time and gave it to Hillary, because they said they can. And this is all in court cases. I'm not just making this stuff up. These are the positions that they took in actual court cases, that they can decide these things in a smoky back room, and they did so. Well, it's the same kind of thing they did in Iowa, where if you look at Pete Buttigieg's support, I mean, it rockets upward right in time for the Iowa caucus. And, I'm having a hard time believing it. Why? Because they needed somebody. They've been searching around for anybody. They needed somebody to try to take out Bernie Sanders. Well, if you look at even the reported votes, and we finally do have the delegate count assigned, but if you look at even the reported votes, and I just find this funny, for a group that hates the Electoral College so much and thinks we ought to go by the popular vote, we got to go by the popular vote all the time. Well, guess what? Bernie won the popular vote in Iowa by over 2,500 votes. He won. But who gets the most delegates? Buttigieg. Buttigieg gets 14 delegates. Bernie Sanders only gets 12. Elizabeth Warren, Hiawatha, she gets 8. Biden gets 6. And we'll tell you more about Biden in just a minute, because, he barely deserves the 6 he got, believe me. Amy Klobuchar, she got 1. Meanwhile, we're expected to believe that there was some sort of error in the app that counted all these votes. Well, Sidney Blumenthal's kid, Max Blumenthal, reports, and believe me, he is no conservative. He is a raging liberal. But he reports that there's something very strange going on with the group that designed and distributed this app that counted the votes in Iowa. The actual company that did it is called Shadow Inc., but the money behind Shadow Inc. comes from a dark money nonprofit called Acronym that was seeded by the Silicon Valley billionaire Reid Hoffman. Now, he's the founder of LinkedIn and a political activist. But that app was a political hit job on Bernie Sanders. And that's what we got to see. It supposedly malfunctions, miscounts everything. They're talking about recanvassing Iowa, and apparently Bernie Sanders is going to call for that by today at 1 p.m., that they do a recanvass in Iowa. Why? Because he won, and they're not giving him the win. They don't want him to win. Meanwhile, the guy that they are giving the win really doesn't have a chance, in my opinion, of winning. Listen to this guy. Here he is in New Hampshire on Friday night. The guy's made an entire career out of filling the air with words, but saying absolutely nothing. Listen to what Pete Buttigieg says and try to figure this out if you can.
I'm not interested in the labels. I'm not interested in what Republicans are going to say. I'm interested in the style of politics that we need to put forward to actually, finally turn the page. In order to win, yes, but also in order to govern. This is a moment where the next president is going to face challenges, the likes of which we hadn't even thought of a few years or decades ago. And politically,
we're
facing
about?
A fundamentally new problem with President Donald Trump. So the biggest risk we could take at a time like this would be to go up against that fundamentally new challenge by trying to fall back on the familiar, or trying to unite this country at a moment when we need that kind of unification, when our nominee is dividing people with a politics that says if you don't go all the way to the edge, it doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
Politics that says it's my way or the highway.
What is that guy even talking about? He's just up there like, oh boy, let me just think of something else that I could say that won't get me in any trouble, right? That's all he's doing. And speaking of getting in trouble, we got a clip to play from you from Joe Biden. This guy just makes you scratch your head. He's done for, but we called that weeks ago that he's done for. Just let me stay on this Buttigieg and Sanders thing for a minute, because I'll tell you what, the media, you can't trust them at all. But I'll tell you, when they decide it's got to be Buttigieg, they will come out in force against Sanders. And Chris Matthews, who I don't care for at all, really did that. And he even implied that Bernie Sanders would have been cheering as he was shot in Central Park if the communists had won the Cold War. Listen to this.
I have my own views of the word socialist, and I'll be glad to share them with you in private. And they go back to the early 1950s. I have an attitude about them. I remember the Cold War. I have an attitude towards Castro. I believe if Castro and the Reds had won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park, and I might have been one of the ones getting executed. And certain other people would be there cheering, okay? So I have a problem with people who took the other side. I don't know who Bernie supports over these years. I don't know what he means by social. 1 week it's Denmark. We're going to be like Denmark. Okay, that's harmless. That's basically a capitalist country with a lot of good social welfare programs. Denmark is harmless. Well, what does he think of Castro? That's a great question. What did you think of Fidel Ismo? We all thought he was great when he first. I thought he was cheering like mad for him when he first went in. And then he became a communist and started shooting every one of his enemies.
Think about that. Be careful who you cheer for. Be careful who you support. Because once some of these communists get into power, like Chris Matthews said, they start shooting their enemies.
Do you think the gloves are off now in the Democratic race?
Well, I mean, have the gloves ever been on?
I think in the beginning.
I think their pants are off is what's off. These people are insane. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.